Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Um, we, in our lives, communication is one of the most important things. And in our new world of communicating more and more electronically, we're finding that there are some significant issues that come up with electronic communication that impact our ability to get our message across. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So before the coronavirus, we were able to sit face to face with people or in a group. We could see expressions very clearly. We were able to keep our focus on an actual person. But after the coronavirus, we have spent more time electronically doing communication in a virtual setting. What is interesting about that is we have some distinct challenges surrounding that kind of communication. Yes, the voice comes through. Yes, the words come through. But really, we're missing a whole area of nonverbal communication that we cannot put across in a flat screen media presentation. So we're going to talk today about some of those issues and what we can do to mitigate those challenges. So the key principles of effective communications are still valid today. All of us communicate every day. The better we communicate, the more credibility we have with our clients, our boss, our colleagues. So communication is kind of the foundation for all of the work that we do, whether we're in a healthcare setting, a mental health care setting, or even just in general public venues. Primal communication, that part of communication that is how we say what we say, comprises 85% of understanding and communication. Think of it this way. When we communicate, everything that we do, all of our body language, the sounds that we make, everything goes into the understanding. And you can almost not even understand the words that are being said and still pick up the message. So that's what primal communication is. Excuse me. Communication is about responding to people in a very thoughtful manner. It's about transmitting a thought or an idea in such a way that it's received as it's intended. It's as much or more about the reception of the message than the transmitting of the message. I get a little frustrated when I hear people say, well, it's their problem if they don't get what I'm trying to say. That's not really true. The whole point of communication is to get the thoughts that we have over to another person or to another group of people, so that communication isn't just about us opening our mouth and saying words. It's about the reception of that message and making sure that it is being received the way it was intended. So some of the advantages of electronic communication is we have online feedback options, and that provides us some flexible access. You're able to post your questions in more of an anonymous way. Multimedia options provide opportunities of new options and opinions. There's less environmental distraction. If you think about it, you can stay fairly focused on a screen without having other sounds or activities around you. So for some people, that is less of an environmental distraction. You have an increased ability to stay focused because of those things. I find the disadvantages to electronic communication far outweigh the advantages, however. You have fewer physical cues. You can't see the whole person, so therefore, you can't pick up all those nonverbals. As I'm sitting here speaking to you without the camera on, you can't see that I am using my hands. You can't see my body language. And some of what you would be able to pick up on what the meaning of what I'm trying to say would be picked up from those physical cues. It's real easy to get information and sensory overload. Think of a Zoom meeting where you have multiple people on your screen and they're all communicating with you at the same time. Maybe not with their words or verbally, but you're picking up nonverbal information from 5 people, and it's right there in front of you. There are time lags in communication. As I was sitting here just before we got started, and Courtney, who introduced me, was on her speakerphone, and I could hear her in the room next to me speaking, but what came through the microphone over here was delayed. So it's really odd, and oftentimes it can be very distracting. There are electronic distortions. I was on a meeting not too long ago, and one particular person's electronic device, for whatever reason, was making this weird kind of sound. And it's like, we couldn't get the message from her, what she was trying to convey. There's an increased opportunity for monopolizing conversation. So in a one-on-one kind of communication where you're communicating with one person on that screen, it's easy to be able to kind of focus in on that, and each of you have an opportunity to speak. However, when you're doing a meeting where there's multiple people, it's very easy for people not to pick up who the next speaker is. So there's a lot of overlap of communication, and that can be very problematic. There's an increased possibility for misinterpretation because you don't see all those physical cues. And it's very difficult to ask for clarification because there's so many people and talking over each other in a Zoom kind of meeting. And then there's the distractions from each participant's physical environment. As I'm sitting here at this desk, there was a particular item on the desk that was distracting to me, and I was going to totally focus on it, so I had to move it out of the way. There could be, motion in the window, or there could be paperwork that you have to work on. All of those can provide a distraction and allow you to kind of not be able to focus in on what the conversation is or what the meeting's about. Overcoming some of the challenges in this electronic communication can be really challenging, but they're not insurmountable. So each session, whether it's an individual or group, should have a clear leader or facilitator. What I found in some of the Zoom meetings I've been in is if there isn't a clear leader facilitator, the meeting kind of just rambles and can be hijacked by one person, or it's a bit chaotic. So at the beginning of the session, make sure that the leader should make sure that the goal of the session is clarified. If this is, what is the point of this meeting? It helps if there's an agenda. It helps if you send that out beforehand so that everyone can see where we're going to go in that meeting, especially if it has multiple people involved in the meeting. The rules of the session should be clear and reviewed as needed. I was doing a phone conference with the staff the other day, and I could hear somebody hadn't muted their phone. And I stopped the session twice to be able to say, listen, you need to mute your phone. You can be heard over the thing. Even though at the time I was not the speaker, but as the leader of the meeting, I needed to take that responsibility. Again, so if there's challenges during the session, the leader should step in and work to resolve them before moving on. The leader needs to pay attention to the visual and verbal cues that the participants may display. So especially in a Zoom meeting or a FaceTime kind of a meeting, you need to pay attention to those visual and verbal cues. They're reduced because of the size of the screen or the two-dimensional aspect of the screen. However, it means that you need to pay closer attention to those visual and verbal cues that you can pick up. So some of the challenges, one of the biggest challenges and biggest frustrations I found is the increased likelihood of participant talkovers due to time lapses, the singularity of voice recognition, the two-dimensional nature of the flat screen of the device. So I was in a Zoom meeting the other day, and we were talking about a particular situation, and I don't know if you know the Zoom meeting, but there can be a little yellow frame to the speaker if they are talking. But what picks up is if they make a noise. It isn't necessarily that they're speaking, that there's a noise. So that ends up being a difficulty as well. So the solution is the leader or facilitator of the session should really set the rules of the session, outlining the agenda, set the expectations, and really important, outline ways to pass the baton of conversation. So if you're in a Zoom meeting and you have somebody that wants to speak, raise your hand. That can be a very easy visual cue that somebody has something to say, and the leader needs to be able to say, so-and-so, you go ahead and speak, or what's your input on this session? So it's really important as a leader, it's important for us to be able to have a way to pass that baton of conversation. There's fewer physical cues. You can't visualize the body language due to the smaller screens. There's sensory overload with multiple images. Those things can be really distracting, I found. So the solutions, each participant needs to pay attention to the screen and keep your eyes on the speaker, making note of facial expressions. Don't get distracted by your environment or activity with other participants. I found myself in several Zoom meetings where I was not able to focus on that. I started focusing on my desk and putting papers away and finishing projects, and my email was going crazy and I was distracted by that. So decrease that. I put my Zoom meeting over my email now, so I can't see my email, and I work really hard to make sure that the area around the computer is cleared so I don't get distracted by other work that I have to do. Distractions. One of the biggest distractions for someone like me who has a little bit of OCD or and attention deficit disorder is too many live images on the screen. When I'm speaking, when I'm in a live meeting, it's easier for me to focus in on one person, but when I have all 5 people staring at me in the face, it's easy to get distracted by those live images. And then we talked about the distractions in your environment. So some solutions: close the door to the space you're using. Make sure you put a sign on the door that you're in session or unavailable. And then clear the area around your screen and your desk to decrease that temptation to multitask. So some tips for effective electronic communication. Remember those 3 C's of communication: clear, keep it simple, keep it straightforward, and keep it very singular in content. This isn't the time to be distracted in your speech by tangents and rabbit trails. Be very concise. Stick to the point. Be brief. This isn't the time to be very verbose or flowery in speech. This is really the time in this electronic age to be very concise and stick to that point. And be compelling. Be creative. Use examples. Use stories. Those things can catch the attention of the listener. So I want to talk a little bit about primal communication, the how we say what we say. Body language and facial expressions are really important, and those are restricted in the use of electronic communication. So be aware of what you're conveying in your facial expression. I find it a little bit easier with a Zoom meeting because I see my face up there so I can see what I'm doing when I'm talking or speaking. But you also need to be aware of what you're doing when you're listening. Like when you roll your eyes and your face is up there with 5 other people, everybody can see you roll your eyes. Where if you're in a meeting with somebody, only the person sitting right across from you is going to see that eye roll. So be really aware of what you might be conveying that everybody's going to be able to pick up. Paraverbal communication, that's somewhat more of the verbal but not language part of communication. So that's the tone of voice, your voice inflections. You can say a lot when you cop an attitude in your voice, and people can pick that up. So be very cognizant of that. Volume is another. If you raise your voice, it increases the anxiety of the listener, and they oftentimes can't hear. If it's too low, it also can do the same thing. So keep your volume at a good level so it can be heard by everyone, and not do lots of wild things unless you're doing emphasis or something like that. Cadence is the rhythm or rate that you speak. Have you ever been in a situation where someone speaks extremely slowly, and as you listen to them, all you want to do is say, hurry up? Or someone who speaks so fast and so quickly, even without taking a breath sometimes, that you can't even get everything understood. So be careful about the cadence that you're using. You can use cadence, a change in your rhythm and rate, to put some personality in it or give some emphasis to something that you're saying. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that you're being clearly understood. So you'll need to keep those in mind. So I put this up. This is one of my favorite sayings. This is a very simple statement. I didn't tell Tom you were incompetent. But listen how it changes when I change the cadence, the volume, the emphasis in this sentence. I didn't tell Tom you were incompetent. You hear that. It wasn't me that did it. It was somebody else. I didn't tell Tom you were incompetent. Maybe you emailed it. I didn't tell Tom you were incompetent. Oh, I told somebody else. I didn't tell Tom you were incompetent. I told him somebody else was. I didn't tell Tom you were incompetent. I said something else. So changing the emphasis of the words that you say and the way you say them can change the whole meaning of a sentence. And that's where that misinterpretation can come out. When you're not live and can't clarify that with other body language, or even the opportunity to ask, what did you mean by that? Or how is that possible? It really can lend itself to a lot of misinterpretation of the message. So be a more mindful communicator. Be present during the session. Maintain good eye contact, even if you are doing it electronically. Practice mindful listening and practice mindful speaking. So what is that? Mindful listening is actually listening, not comparing your thoughts or experiences to the participants while they're speaking. Don't mind read or predict what the speaker will say. Don't spend your listening time rehearsing what you plan to say or doing anything else like doing your grocery list or your to-do list or something like that. Don't judge what the speaker is saying before they finish. Don't jump in. This is probably one of our most difficult things because we We tend to jump in at the beginning of a statement, not hearing the whole thing. So be very careful. I have to be very careful because I like to jump in and say my piece, but really we have to finish letting the other person speak so that they get their whole thought down. Sometimes the beginning of a sentence or the beginning of a communication is not representative of what they wanted to say in its totality. Be really comfortable with silence. I think one of the most difficult things we have is letting people have some time and space and being comfortable with silence. Silence can be a very powerful tool in allowing people to formulate their thoughts and take in the information that has been given to them. Okay, stay on topic. This is mindful speaking. You really have to practice staying on topic and not going off on those bunny trails. Going off on bunny trails can hijack a conversation, monopolize the topic. So stay on topic. Pay attention to what you're saying. Be very concise, direct, specific. Think about what you're saying before you actually speak so that you are saying what you mean and making sure that you're conveying that message the best that you can. Pay attention to how others are responding to what you're saying. You have to keep an eye on their verbal cues or their nonverbal cues. What is their facial expression? Are they rolling their eyes? Are they grimacing? What are you seeing as they respond to your message? Clarify your message. If you're picking up that people aren't getting what you say, then go back and clarify what your meaning was. Respect others' time and attention. Remember that these are all of our time is valuable, so we need to be very respectful and not monopolize time. Make sure that we're giving it the time that it's due, but not taking overtime. Be truthful and authentic. That's a given in any kind of communication. So as we conclude, I'm going to say electronic communication really has its advantages and disadvantages. I can have much more far-reaching communication and be able to really communicate with people at a distance. I Skype my kids who live in California, and I'm able to see them and see how my grandkids are doing and that kind of thing. So it does have some really good advantages, but it also has those disadvantages. I can't hear everything when too many people are talking, those kinds of things. It's up to the participants to mitigate those challenges and disadvantages. And I would say even the leaders need to really take the lead on mitigating those challenges and disadvantages. The principles of effective communication are still in effect. Just because we're doing it electronically doesn't mean that we need to be very careful of what we say and how we say it. We need to remember that we're visible and on stage. I used to act in musical comedies, and one of the things I learned early on is it doesn't matter if I'm the center stage person, if I'm the one speaking or singing or whatever I'm doing. At the time, my presence is part of the whole. And if I am not in character and remembering that I'm on stage, I can distract people from what's going on in the message that's being sent. So keep in mind that you're on stage when you're doing electronic communication like this. Always circle back and make sure your message was clear and understood. All right, thank you very much, and I'll take some questions. Okay, one of the questions was, can you touch on social media communication and when not to respond to negative comments? I find social media to be very, very frustrating. because it is a anonymous stage where you don't have to be responsible for the responses. You can just say your piece and let it out there. So a lot of times I think that things that are being said and things that are being communicated via social media are really attention-seeking behavior. So it's really important to see what is the message that's being sent, and what are the ramifications. If you respond, is that going to further instigate more responses and that kind of thing? So you really have to be able to look at those in a very mindful way and think about what are the ramifications of what happens with that. I remember years when I was a young kid, and I was dating, and I have a sister who was in high school with me, and the boys flocked to her, and I remember going home and saying to my dad, man, every time I'm in a conversation with a group of people, my sister hijacks the conversation or gets involved, and she garnishes all the attention to her. And my dad said something I'll never forget. All she has to do is open her mouth, Sue. They will know the difference. So sometimes it's that being very mindful about how we respond. Sometimes it's going to be more about maybe not responding is the best thing. So looking at what the long-term ramifications and what that can do is probably one of the most important things with responding to social media. The next question is, do you think with anonymity, people feel emboldened on social media platforms? I think it's absolutely true. And I think that the lack of having somebody face-to-face and feeling their emotional response emboldens people. It's very easy to post a derogatory comment because you're not going to get any emotional feedback on that in social media. So I don't post much on social media for that very reason. When responding on social media, do people really hear the other side, or do they just egg each other on? I see that social media is more of a soapbox than anything else. It's a time to stand up and say your piece and not be really mindful about the ramifications of what you say, or the or the consequences of what's being said, and you don't have to feel those consequences. So yeah, I think it's not about hearing anyone else. It's about being heard and walking away. I said my piece, I'm done. So, okay, the next question. When email communication, how do people hear your voice? How do you help people hear your voice? Often people read on email and try and interpret what they think you're implying. It's easy to get it wrong sometimes. Yeah, it's probably more difficult in just written communication, because not only do you're not getting any feedback. You're writing out what you think, and it's going out there, and you don't have the verbal, nonverbal cues to know how it's being received. So really with email, any kind of written communication, it really, really is important that you be thoughtful about what you're saying. I will reread it because it's very, very easy for me to make mistakes. It's very easy. And if I'm very concerned about an email, I will take it to somebody and say, can you read this before I hit send? Is it saying the message I want to say? Is it doing it without the emotion that I may be feeling right at the moment, but I don't necessarily want to convey? So I really encourage people to check that with their emails, reread them, have somebody else read them if you're concerned about how it's going to come across, especially if it's a difficult message. All right. that's all the time we have and all the questions. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you another time.